And now, ladies and gentlemen,
Put your thumbs up and say it's Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo, Tickety Boo, everything's Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo, son. Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo.
Welcome to Tickety Boo. Today we're talking about one of life's biggest challenges, pivoting. Whether it's after a breakup, a career change, or just feeling stuck, we all face those moments where we need to shift direction. But here's the thing, change isn't failure, it's growth. So if you've ever felt stuck or wondered, what if I tried something new? This episode is for you. Let's dive into how pivoting can open new doors and get us moving forward. So here we are back in the Tickety Boo studio, and today we are speaking about pivoting. Now, what do we mean by pivoting? Because in my mind, there's two pivots. Mm-hmm. There are life situations that are put upon you where you have to be reactive and you have to pivot, like losing a job or your home or something like that. And then there's sort of a proactive pivot where you've decided you've come to a point in your life and you want things to change. They're both very different, but probably have very similar feelings of anxiety and worry around them. So today I just wanted to spend a bit of time talking about pivoting and how life isn't always a straight line and things can change. So can you think of a point in time, Ian, where you've had to pivot in life?
Oh, so many. I think the biggest one that springs to mind is when Louise got ill in 2016 and had a breakdown, and then all of a sudden everything just stopped. Mm-hmm. And it was a change in direction. The businesses that she run, all her personal life, all the family dynamics attached to what we later found out was sort of to do with the cause of it. Everything changed, so we had to just change attitude.
The way you did everything.
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and then Iona, I'm pretty sure you'll have moments in your life where you've pivoted.
My life has been a pivot constantly.
Yeah. Would you say you've consciously chosen to pivot, or have you done more reactive
Honestly,
pivots?
I would say it's both, because when we were having a little chat before we hit record, I realised that it has been a combination of the two. Mm-hmm. And I also really love to pivot. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that's amazing is that we can change what we're doing. We can choose to change direction. We have so many options and possibilities if we want to choose, and it takes courage, which I've talked a little bit about in one of our previous shows, having the courage to change, having the courage to follow something through. And also a lot of my biggest pivots have been thrust upon me. My mother's death was a big pivot back, and then my divorce, emigrating back to the UK. So that was three major life pivots, which are anxiety-inducing themselves within a 6-month period. And that was when I decided, right, I have to become my business. So again, making a conscious choice to, right, what am I going to do that will allow for these big unexpected pivots? Because also part of for me, the pivot is also the opportunity to reinvent. Mm-hmm. And I know that all the clients I work with, particularly when I had the therapy business, but now in the capacity that I work with people now, they're generally trying to change something in their life consciously, or they know they're feeling dissatisfied. So it's like working their business. And quite often the pivot that they end up doing becomes they're like, oh my God, I can choose to do it my way. So it's a conscious pivot, but usually they've got a deeper underlying why, like in memory of somebody, or this is something I've always wanted to do. So really I'm seeing with the people that I work with, it's a combination of it's been thrust upon them and a conscious choice. Because also for me now, it's more important than ever that people do the thing they really want to do. They follow their passions, even if it's going to be a side hobby. I'm not saying you need to make this your career change, but I mean, as we all know, I've experienced a lot of death. My brother died, and so this life is like, this is this life. What are you going to do? What are you choosing to do so you don't become a victim of your circumstance? Yes, hard things can happen, and you can use it as an opportunity to change. And because I'm really about reframing, and we talked a lot into self-identity, what are the stories we're telling ourselves in the last episode. And I think that we all, particularly, I mean, if we think about 2020 was a huge opportunity where people were choosing, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to be in this relationship, I don't want to be in this job, or I do love what I do. There was so many huge life changes that people chose, so they turned an unexpected understatement, unexpected pivot, circumstances thrust upon them. It's like, right, I'm going to make this mean something. I'm going to use this as a chance to, like, adjust sail. And I feel that the power of the pivot is just amazing. Like, what would my brother have done differently if he had chosen to do the thing that would have shifted his life so he was happier? I know it's not as simple as that when it comes to suicide. Yeah. And I'm not saying if people don't pivot, they're going to be suicidal. But this life's short. Like, what are you going to do with this one precious life? And when? Like, if not now, then when? Because if you don't change, nothing's going to change. And I'm, like, as you can tell, like, I'm incredibly passionate about people pivoting because they're going to die. We know that for a fact. So why not do the thing? Pivot by choice.
So pivoting is just a natural part of life. Where the problems come in is where we resist the need to have to pivot. That's where we get ourselves into trouble.
Well, of course, if we don't change, the world around us is changing all the time, totally beyond our control. So if we don't change with it, well, of course, nothing's going to work out well. Yeah, you're gonna meet resistance.
It's when you're afraid to change, where there's uncertainty. You know, we know part of us likes the consistency of patterns, even though those patterns sometimes cause misery and don't keep us in a good place. So I think where a lot of people tend to get stuck or they struggle is that they want to avoid the fear of having to pivot, the uncertainty of having to pivot. And that's really where people need to do the work. They need to... It's almost like that story we were talking about, stories in a previous episode, where I will do this when I feel comfortable to do it, when the time is right.
And again, it's being able to let go. Yeah, you've got an idea, you've got a path in your mind. It's not working out, but you've got to be able to let go, accept.
We're so fiercely held onto that outcome,
of course,
trying to control outcomes of situations.
Yeah, and I really want to let our listeners know this isn't just about career or business or going entrepreneurial or training. It's about relationships. It's about what are we doing with our time that you no longer want to do? What's the thing you want to change? Like, if we could wave a magic wand, what would you do differently? What do you want different? And having the courage and feeling the fear, because I think when it comes to making these conscious choices, fear kills more dreams, whether it's leaving the relationship, starting a new career. Fear of the unknown kills more dreams and more opportunity than anything else. Whereas if we can become friends with our fear, because fear and anxiety feel the same in the body, it's that, like, oh my gosh, like it can't, like it's palpable, you can feel it. What are you choosing to have that fear mean?
So why do we think then that some people just seem to be able to pivot and without any issues, and then we've got these other people that really struggle with it?
It's acceptance of the fact that you're not in control. This illusion of control, where people they feel this need for control and they've got this addiction to certainty, and it's all false, because the world around us is always changing. COVID, perfect example. You going in one direction, then all of a sudden the world just says stop.
Yeah,
and you have to change.
I've noticed that what we tend to do is when we see somebody doing a pivot and there's a reluctance or a fear on our part to pivot, we'll criticise the person for making big life changes. I've seen it in the therapy room where somebody's decided at whatever age they're at, they're going to completely turn their life around. They're going to leave the job, they're going to move to another place, and they're going to do something completely different. And there's, people either looking at them going, wow, I would love to be able to do that, but I never would because of the story that they're telling themselves. Or they look at it and go, they're crazy. I mean, who do they think they are at that age or that point in life to be turning around? Because the thing is, the older we get, you almost start to tell yourself the story. It's too late for me. I've had my time. where I'm seeing more and more people who are 60s and even in the 70s just changing everything, like flipping their life 180 degrees and making it completely unrecognizable. And to me, it's just, is that difference between the one person who one day goes, do you know what, that's it, everything changes.
It's really interesting that I'm going to share a story about one of my clients, and I'm pretty sure that I work with, and she was able to reflect where being in the group we were in, being in the community that we're in, she was going to do something, and she said, oh my gosh, it's so empowering to be around all of you. None of you have said, oh my gosh, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. You've all been like, brilliant, let me hold your coat, pretty much. And so we gave her permission just by being accepting and not trying to change her. So she lost her fear of doing it, and she did the thing. And then she came out and she felt so liberated and so empowered, because it's about the community we're keeping. It's the people we choose to surround ourselves with. And yes, she goes back and she's got her own family, but it was being within this environment where we gave her permission purely by not judging her and literally, quite frankly, holding her coat. And I think it's giving that permission to be ourselves. Like, who are we? When we talked in the last episode, who are you really? Like, what is it you want to do? Do you want to go wild water swimming? I mean, not me. I get cold. As you can see, I keep layering up every episode we do. But for some people, like, it's like if you knew you were 100% safe, what would you do? And when I say 100% safe, it's like financial, like all your basic needs are met, like everything, like what would you do? And maybe you're not trying to change your career or your business. Maybe you want to go cold water swimming every day. It doesn't have to be this big, huge pivot. It can be like following that passion, that thing that you really want to do, that lights you up, that gives you that energy, that fuels that fire, that fuels your passion and makes you feel inspired in your life, so that, when we get to the end of life, you don't go back and go, oh, I regret doing all those wild and crazy things. Like, we want to look back and go, yeah, heck, I did it.
I notice a pattern in my life where I've had to pivot. Most of my pivots in the past have been reactive. So something's happened and I've needed to do something with that. So an example would be when we went into COVID and we went into lockdown, my reactive pivot was very quickly I needed to take all of the classroom training online. But that was driven by anxiety, because it's like, if I don't pivot in this point, income's going to stop, training's going to collapse, and then that's the business gone. So that was like a pivot of necessity.
Well, I have a question for you then, because you see that was a reactive.
Yeah.
It was necessary, and the anxiety. What is the lesson you've learned by coming through that?
But that's where I was going to go with it. I've also, in other areas of my life, pivoted, changed the way that I do things. And the feeling from the proactive pivot to the reactive pivot was exactly the same. There was uncertainty, so there was anxiety. So what that shows me in that moment is whether you decide you want to make change or changes are put upon you, at some point you're going to feel uncertainty and anxiety. And it's almost like that's just part of the process. And sometimes we have to learn to become comfortable being uncomfortable for a period of time.
And I love that, and I just want to have us repeat that again. So you have said that anxiety is the same whether you're choosing to pivot or the pivot's forced upon you.
Yeah.
I said something similar. The fear is the same whether you are choosing or whether it's thrust upon you. Yeah. So inviting our listeners to go, look, you can reframe. It's okay to feel fearful. It's okay to feel anxiety, and learn to utilize that and recognize that.
Yeah, I think when the reactive pivot, the example I gave of moving the training online quickly, the anxiety was, a lot of it was self-created because I created a sense of urgency. So I was creating stress. It's almost like I need to do this and I need to do this right now. I think the slight difference is when you decide to make a pivot in your life, you can almost create a timeline. You can phase that transition in. But the underlying feeling was exactly the same, which was uncertainty and fear. So if you're telling yourself the story, I will pivot when I feel comfortable, you will probably never pivot, because change by its very nature is uncomfortable. And as humans, we are hardwired to move away from discomfort.
Yeah. Well, it's just like they say, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, 50 years ago, and if not, or now. So there's never a right time except right now and to do it. And with some of the pivots for me, that whether I've chosen them or not, when that fear has come in, again, which I keep saying practically almost at every episode, what will change if I don't do it? Because I remember there's been some opportunities that have come my way that have pivoted my career, and I have and I recognized it and knew it at the time, like the fear I felt, and I could have just carried on. Everything was good. Nothing would have been disastrous if I hadn't taken these opportunities, which filled me with fear. But the fear was judgment, fear of being judged by others, the fear of failing, the fear of not doing it. And actually the fear of not doing it and not taking that opportunity was the driver that was like, I'm doing this because if I don't do this, nothing's going to change. And the thing is I wasn't trying to change a situation that was bad. My career and what I was doing was great, but I'm like, but I've been given this opportunity, and what's the worst that happens is nothing comes from it. I fall flat on my face, so what?
Yeah.
I get up and carry on. So the fear of not doing it was greater than the fear of doing it in the end for me.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed. As you were talking, a client came into my mind there, how sometimes when things go wrong or not to plan, especially if you're executing a pivot, it's like part of you goes, I tried to pivot, it backfired, therefore don't pivot. So there was a client of mine who later in life decided to retrain and become an optician. And they purchased there was an optician retiring, so they purchased their business, their shop. This was at the tail end of 2019. We go crashing into COVID and lockdown, and that deal fell apart because the shop was shut and the world closed down and all the rest of it, and the deal didn't end up happening. Then her partner became ill and was unable to work, so she stayed in the career that she was in, abandoned the idea of becoming this optician after all the training that she did and owning her own opticians, dropped into a holding pattern of I now need to be the breadwinner. I need to keep doing the job I'm doing even though I don't like it. And now, here in 2024, she's still doing the job that she doesn't like. She's abandoned the pivot even though her husband's better now and she's in a different set of circumstances. When I was talking to her, I said, you do know you can go back to the pivot. You don't have to buy the shop, and maybe the shop wasn't meant to happen, but there's something else that you can do. And she's like, I know, but I'm finding big resistance now when it comes towards a pivot. And I think that's where a lot of people are reluctant to make changes in their life because maybe they've tried it before and it hasn't worked. And then if you feel like you're stuck in that space, that leads you down into things like anxiety, depression, overwhelm in whatever that you're doing. So failed pivots can be the very thing that stop you from moving forwards.
But the thing is, you're not really failing because firstly, it's never a failure if you try. Secondly, you're never going to be starting back from scratch because you've got all your wisdom, all your experience and all your contacts to go back to pick up where you left from. So you're never going to lose everything. You're never going to start again. It's always worth it.
Yeah, there's no failure. There's just feedback. Where's the lesson?
I'm so glad you said where's the lesson, because listening to what you said, and we've talked about this before, if something doesn't go well, whether it's the pivot or the choice, whatever it is, you can look at, well, what went well, what would I do again, and what would I do differently? So you can examine it, so you have that wisdom, because we can learn from everything, whether it went in the direction or we didn't. And it's sometimes so much easier to reflect back, in like hindsight's a wonderful thing, going, oh, I see that if that hadn't happened and that deal hadn't fallen through, or the optician's building hadn't gone, then I wouldn't actually be doing this. So in hindsight, we can see the connections. But yeah, so if we can start to learn to see I know from before, opportunity or something else happens, and something usually better. Because again, it's that optimism can be learnt.
That's it. And how many times have we said, if I knew then what I knew now? Well, you do now. Go use it. That's all but
Yeah.
and this is the other thing about when you're pivoting. I always call it being at a crossroads, and all of a sudden you find yourself at a crossroads and you don't always know what way to go, but it's a choice. And when you're at that crossroads, you've got all these different roads or paths available to you. And what I always say to my clients is, when you know, just focus on what's at the end of that path, what your goal is, what it is that's important to you, what is your why. You need to have a why when you enter that pivot. So if you've got a why, what happens is you stay focused on that. But what happens is you talk to the guy in the pub and your mind gets going, they start talking about all the obstacles that jump out into that path, and you lose sight of your why. And all you do, you've got a path and you're looking along this path and all you can see is obstacles and no end goal, because you've lost your why in sight of all them obstacles that might happen, which is what you were saying about the lady in her resistance to pivot. So who would ever go down that path if all they can ever see is obstacles with no end goal and no why? So the most important thing is, when you've got to pivot, work out your why. Work out your why and hold that tight and make that why something you're passionate about, something you want to do, something that is better than the existence that you've got now, that makes you want to stay and work with it.
It's so true, because if you think about starting something new, whether it's a job, a relationship, moving, doing a change in your life, the moment you decide in your mind, right, that's what I'm going to do, the first thing that's going to happen is your internal story is going to start to tell you all the reasons why not to do it and how it could go wrong.
Yeah, it's so important to look at that why, and I want to come back to that, but quickly I want to say, and also the reframe, because remember those stories, it's obstacles or is it opportunities? It's new learnings. And with the why, I'd totally forgotten about this. I'm so really pleased you brought it up. So my last book that I wrote, which we know weaves positive psychology all the way through it, just as I'd finished the book, I was actually, oh my God, who am I to put this one out? Because it was like, a whole up level from what I've written before. Who am I to do this? Like, I completely went into meltdown. It was fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of it not being good enough. Like, it was done. I'm like, I can't do this. I ended up writing a whole chapter on what's your why. And I actually literally started off by, I think, vaguely saying, I was literally just lying on my sofa crying, going, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, who am I to do this? And that's like, that was like my 7th book. And yet then I'm still going, oh my God, who am I to do this? And I had to reach back into my why, and I'd forgotten. And I actually didn't have a chapter in that book about finding your why. And the whole book is about like finding out and leading your fulfilling life. And I hadn't done a why. So there was a reason I had that slight breakdown. And it's addressing that why. And it's so important, because the why is always, it's bigger than us. And the deeper why is, because sometimes when people, the initial answer is like, well, why do you want to earn more money? Let's make it about that. Because I want the red Ferrari. Well, why? Why? Because usually there's another, again, get deeper down, and there's always something deeper that'll be your bigger why, and also the people that will be affected by you achieving your pivot, your change, whatever it's going to be, the new relationship. It's looking at your why is so important, and your pivot with the business and taking everything on why, yes, that was reactive. But oh my gosh, can you imagine if you hadn't done that?
Yeah, it turned out to be, a great success, but equally it could have fell flat on its face. That was my reactive pivot, and in some ways the universe dealt me a good hand there. But I think, for me, it is kind of, we talked about this in an earlier episode of not becoming so obsessed on the outcome, on the process. I can remember the very first time it was actually during lockdown, going, I'd like to start a podcast. And it was purely from the point of, well, if one person listens to it, takes one bit of information and it positively impacts their lives, then job done, mission accomplished. But then my brain started going, what if nobody listens to it? What if it's rubbish? What about if someone sends you a message going, who do you think you are doing a podcast? You know, all of that stuff. Part of me immediately went to work of going, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't do that. But I stayed in that, what if that one person listens to this and they get something from it and it positively changes their life? And that's what you've got to stay in. I'm not going to worry if the first episode nobody listens to them and they're absolutely rubbish, because I know at some point somebody will take something from it. You talked earlier about how somebody messaged you going, oh my God, I listened to the anxiety episode and it's massively helped me. Thank you. I've already accomplished the mission. Whether we do another 50 episodes or another one, of the objective has been met. And I think that's, obviously a podcast is very different from deciding to leave a job or completely change your career. But the fundamentals are exactly the same, aren't they? The framework of making a choice to do something and the why you're doing it, that's what you've got to focus on.
And you've already, like, your deeper why is if we can impact one person. We know from the episode where we talked about suicide, which we wouldn't have done if you hadn't started the podcast, how many people that affected in a positive way. Mm-hmm. We get to see that again and again, like the whys, and it leads us on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yesterday was World Mental Health Day. Now, if I hadn't started the podcast, this is what I call the snowball effect. And this is what tends to happen, is you do one thing and then it can lead to something else that can lead to something else, and it's all interconnected. So yesterday was World Mental Health Day. We did an episode on suicide not that long ago. I shared it on my socials, my personal socials, as well as the business socials. That was picked up on a friend who works in the media, who then interviewed me on BBC Radio for World Suicide Prevention Day. That then went on yesterday to me being in an hour-long documentary on BBC Radio about mental health, which I don't know how many people have listened to those two interviews. So it's like, if I hadn't have just gone, well, if one person picks up on this and has a positive change, none of all that stuff had happened. If I'd gone into it going, I want to be on the podcast, I want to start a podcast because I want to be on the radio, it probably never would have got there.
Well, and also that would have been inauthentic to you. You want to make a difference. Yeah. You're making a difference. And also some people may go, well, if they're listening going, but I'm not going to start a podcast or this, that's not for me. The thing is, if there's something they want to do and pivot into, that fear of what other people will think, I'm telling you, the people who are doing it as well, the people who are pivoting, the people who are focusing on building their life of impact with a podcast or building their therapy business or coaching business or writing a book, the people who are doing something for themselves like this, they get it. They are not judging you. They are not talking you back down. Like, I remember when my first book was coming out, having somebody say sort of, well, who are you to do this? And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I'm like, oh no, I've got to be ready for this because we all know about online trolls. You've got to be ready for this. I'm like, right, okay, why am I doing this? And it's like, I couldn't imagine not doing it. And then and it's following through on that and focusing on what's your why. It's like, well, I didn't mind if not. My focus wasn't to become a #1 bestseller. My focus was, I have to do this because I have a message to share that can help people. And again, one person reads the book. Like the most amazing thing was in COVID, because that book launched just, the month before COVID happened, was people sending photographs as, oh my gosh, this has gotten me through this. I have it, like sending me photographs of it on their bedside table. And it's like, oh my gosh, like that was why I did it. It was that was rewarding, and not because of anything other. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm helping one person. It's that ripple effect.
Guys, someone at home now listening to this episode who's going, well, my pivot is I'm thinking about leaving my job, changing my vocation. I'm reconsidering my relationship. Whatever it may be, and they're sitting there going, I don't even know where to start. What do we say to them? That you're that person sitting there going, I would love to leave the job I've done for 20 years and I don't know how to do anything else, or whatever it may be.
Well, if if you're not entirely sure what you do want, look at what you don't want. Look at what you're not happy with. Look at what you're not willing to accept anymore. And that will be part of the structure of what you want going forward. If you're sat there and you know you're going to pivot, you know you're going to change direction, at this precise moment in time, you've got time. It's not reactive, you're actually sitting. And this is where the most incredible changes in my life have happened. I've had the reactive changes that have kept me going, and then I've had the considered pivots which have made incredible changes to my life. But it always involved me working out, where do I want to go, what do I want to leave behind, what's important to me, who do I want to stay close to, who do I not need around me anymore, who's holding me back, who's important to me. And that's what I would say. If you can't work out what you want, just start with what you don't want anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And looking at how things make you feel.
Well, I wanted to carry on from this as well first. Is yes, looking at how things make you feel. There's a process. If you've got my book Elemental Abundance, it's in there. It's called hope mapping. You could also Google online, and it's a proven positive psychology intervention. You focus on that thing you're wanting, that you're aiming for, just like Ian said, and then you have what are the different things I could do to get there? What do I need to do? Because as we've said before, you find everything that's wrong. So then you look at all the reasons that would get in the way, and then how you would resolve that. So you're working through the resistance and the objections and finding new pathways and new opportunities. And part of that exercise is also who's going to support you. How can you be accountable for whatever it is you're wanting to change? Who do you know? It could be a partner, it could be a friend, it could be a relative. Is there someone you're going to check in with? If there's a retraining or a vocation you want to go into, is there a way that somebody where you're training can check in on you? So you start setting up a support system. And then through this process, you actually find your deeper why. And it's always about who else is going to benefit from this. It's about how you're going to feel. And it's so important because when we get committed to the why we want to change, we can't do this alone. So when we're feeling overwhelmed and we don't know how to change, working through these processes, examining our ways, but also who's going to find a support system. We have plenty of ways to be supported. There's groups for everything nowadays, quite frankly. They don't necessarily have to be in your local community. There's so many opportunities for support online. Get involved in other people making changes. If you need to retrain, there'll be other people there who are retraining as well. There's a lot of ways we can find support, because I think one of the most important things when you're pivoting is you need that support. You need somebody in your corner.
Yeah, but I do think there is an element of pivoting initially that can be quite lonely, which is while you're figuring that bit out. In the early stages of reflecting on doing a pivot, where you're up inside your own head and you're having a chat with yourself about it, and there's that internal should I, shouldn't I, can I, will I. And I think at that stage of a pivot, you have to be really careful about who you open up to.
Yes,
because a lot of the people around you are actually pretty well within that circumstance or in that circle that you're trying to escape.
Yeah.
So the minute that you try and you come up with ideas that are outside of their box and that doesn't fit with them and their narrative that's in their place where they're quite happy, they're going to naysay. That's it.
Careful who you share it with while it's in that incubation stage. But let's go hypothetical here. We've got somebody who's listening to this episode right now whose job is really impacting their mental health, and maybe it's a job they've done all of their life, and they feel as though there's nothing else that they can really do. And when you're in that space of believing there's nothing else that you can do and this is it and it's not going to really change, we know the negative impacts that they have. What do we say to that person then? Where do they go? Where do they start? I mean, for me, it's just start by making the decision. This needs to change.
Yes, definitely. And I've got the courage and I'm willing to make it change. You've got to be willing to put yourself out there. But again, look at what is it that I need to change. Is it the environment? Is it the people I'm working with? Or is it the job? Is it the job just doesn't fit me? Is there something that's changed within me that has it then impacted how I feel about what I'm doing. I love this job for years, and then somebody said something to me, and I've lost my confidence, and now that's something that you can work on, or you can work with somebody, or it could be you just can't stand the job. It no longer fits with your moral compass, so you're living outside your what fits with you and your makeup. You can't change that.
I think it's okay not to know what you want to do and what it's going to look like. I think the most important thing is recognising that you don't want to keep doing or going the way that you're going. Yeah. I was talking to somebody at the beginning of the week, a client, and through they were made redundant. And at the time they had a very young child, and they were worried about, finances coming in, keeping a roof over their head. And they decided that they were going to go out and start collecting people's rubbish. Stuff that people normally take to the tip or they get a skip for. And he, with his nephew, 15-year-old nephew at the time, kind of did it just as, he bought him his lunch and he got a pair of helping hands. That business now has got 3 or 4 depots across the UK. That nephew that's now helping him as a director of the business, and they employ lots of staff, and it's massively successful. Now, that was a forced pivot, and don't get me wrong, not all pivots turn out like that, but he just decided to try something in that moment with no idea whether it would work or not. And although you might not feel like it, there is always something, a transferable skill, even if that's you're just good at talking to people, or you're organised, outgoing, whatever it may be. We've all got transferable skills that we can do something with.
I had a client who had made a couple of pivots by choice, and then she was like, oh, this isn't working, so I'm going to do this. So she kept changing. She was younger, and so she was now on her nursing degree, and she actually came to me to help her with motivation. And because she wanted to be motivated to study, she was really struggling, and she still had 3 more years to go. And I was like, well, I can't get you to be motivated about something you're not interested in and you don't want to do. But she's like, no, but so she'd chosen this pivot, and this is the thing she was going to settle on, and she was determined. And then we unpacked and we explored it. Anyway, it turned out she actually wanted a DJ, which sounds so far away from nursing. And I was like, well, why don't you do that? She's like, well, this is what I've chosen. This is what I do. I'm like, go off to Ibiza and
change it
and do it. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, I can't make you more motivated and give you the confidence to do something you don't want to do when you clearly want to go and DJ. Because when she started talking about DJing, her whole face lit up. And we've all been in a situation like that. I'm like, I ended up not working with her. It was that initial session. I'm like, no, you don't need me. You need to just go do the thing that you want to do.
She just needed you to give her permission to go and do the thing.
Yeah, and that was it. So for all,
motivation's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. Like if I said to you right now, you need to jump in your car and you need to drive 350 miles down south to, I don't know, go and look at the view or something like that, and you're like, I'm not massively motivated to do that right now. But if I said to you, if you drive to that exact location right now, there's a winning lottery ticket there, suddenly your motivation turns up from absolutely nowhere, doesn't it? Go get the money, go get the ticket. And that's why you've got to think about why you are doing the pivot, especially if it's one where you're consciously deciding to pivot. And it's the same for, we don't want to make this all about starting a business or becoming self-employed, but just
running off to Ibiza to DJ.
To be a DJ. Pivoting out of a relationship, pivoting out of a circle of friends that you find yourself in. It all does lead back to that initial, why am I doing this? What is the story that I'm telling myself that stopped me from doing the pivot, and what's the flip of that story should I make the pivot and it is successful? What will that look like? And this whole nonsense that we tell ourselves that we're too old, not educated enough, not clever enough, not worthy enough, all of those are just part of you trying to protect you from failing at some kind of level.
But I think Morgan Freeman didn't even get his first acting role till he was 58 or something like that. We hear of people going from one sort of... It's really easy to find information if you Google, who became an actor later in life, but they've been doing something completely unrelated. It's not like it was something they were trying to pursue. So,
Generally, when you see success, show me that person, and they'll be able to show you lots of failures.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't like the word failure. Non-successes
Yeah.
that led to success. That's the truth, isn't it? You know, people sometimes look at you and go, "It's all right for you. You know, you've got this and you've got that." We talked in a previous episode where somebody sees you run your own business and go, "You're a millionaire," and you're like, "No, it's all right for you. You've got your own business and you're really successful." That's not the reality. That's what you're seeing. You haven't seen all the other stuff that goes on in the background. And those that have run the business and worked themselves, there's days where it's just as horrible, if not worse, than being in a full-time employed job that you're really not enjoying, apart from nobody else is coming to fix it.
And
so
then you get
so
to
it's
go
down
home
to
at
you.
the end of the day and have the weekend and you're off. Whereas
Yeah.
I remember when I first went self-employed and entrepreneurial, it's like, oh, I see, I stopped doing that and now I'm working even more hours. Hang on a second, that wasn't quite like, yeah. So it's not...
Like for me, I decided I wanted to be self-employed because I wanted to have the freedom to choose what I did and how I did it, and do it my own way. So fundamentally, I think I was unemployable. completely unemployable. So I made myself, I employed myself. And I just think, people that don't pivot is generally because they're telling themselves a story that they're not good enough at some kind of level, or that if it all goes horribly wrong, what are they going to do then? But what about if it all goes right?
Yeah.
So maybe the answer from this episode is just do it anyway.
Yeah.
Just do the thing. I'm not saying be reckless and go and throw it all, go and throw your job away and run out of money. Start doing the thing while you're doing the thing you don't like.
Say, you don't have to give up your life to go and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, with therapy, I've had some pivots that have brought some life-changing success. So that's been great. So all of a sudden, I've got to a point in my life where, on the opposite side of saying, I don't like my life, I've said, well, I've kind of achieved what I wanted to. I'm quite happy with where I am now. Mm-hmm. I've kind of lost that desire and burn. I don't get the enjoyment out of pushing a wheelbarrow around a cold building site anymore. What do I want to do? And it was take the stuff that I'd learned as part of my self-discovery journey, and I like to help people.
Yeah.
And then I'll roll with that. So for me, going into the therapy, that gives me a sense of purpose. That gives me a new why. I've not had to stop doing the other stuff as well that maintains a big chunk of my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. But what I have got is I've got my why back again. I've got that buzz. When you see that state change in a client in front of you, and you've just sent them back out the door and their world has just changed, you cannot get that buzz anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'm lucky I've got that back. Mm-hmm. You don't have to give up one to do the other. It can be a transition between the two. You can try it out to see whether it is for you, see whether it isn't. It is new after all. Mm-hmm. But don't not do it. Really, just
I love that.
Take a leap of faith.
Because it is that leap of faith, isn't it? You're not so hell-bent on needing to know what the outcome is going to be. But the one thing that you do know is if you're going to keep doing what you're doing right now and you're unhappy, you're going to continue to be unhappy or unfulfilled or whatever it is.
When you really want to do what you want to do, you'll be amazed at how resilient you are and how you can find ways to make that happen for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But again, it comes back to wanting to do it.
Yeah, and I think whether you're coming from, Ian, you've chosen to do this, you're at a sense in your life where it's like, okay, I want a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose. You're happy with where you are, and it sounds like you want to contribute, you want to do more and share your insights.
I want to feel like I've made a difference.
Yeah.
And you've just said it just right, a bigger purpose.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and for anyone listening as well, this is two sides of the same coin. If they're unhappy and dissatisfied, they get to change too. So it's two different areas, same side, two sides of the same coin, because we have a psychological human desire, once all our basic needs are met, human desire to find a deeper meaning and purpose in life, and we want to contribute, we want to have an impact, we want to do good. it's like it's hardwired into us.
And I think the other thing is recognising you've been pivoting your whole life anyway. Think of a young kid at school. You've got your circle of friends, and then maybe there's a bit of a fallout, so you pivot into another friends group, and that happens all the way through your life, doesn't it? You've been unconsciously pivoting all your life, just rotating into different areas, different spaces, different people. So pivot on top of the pivot. This podcast, we will pivot. We pivot the style from in the studio to not being on video to being on video, hosts changing, topics changing. The pivot never stops, does it?
No.
It's when you're not pivoting at any kind of level and you're just stagnant in one place, doing the thing that served you once, but now things have changed.
I think pivoting is exciting.
It can be.
I
Exhilarating.
think so,
Exhilarating.
Exhilarating.
Yeah, whether an exhilarating on a roller coaster can be like fearful, or it can be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, so it's,
Yeah, get on the roller coaster, enjoy
on
the
the roller
rides.
coaster.
Yes.
I've been riding that roller coaster all my life, I think. Queen of pivoting here.
Cool. Okay, so final thoughts on this. If somebody's listening right now, Ian, what would you say to them if they're considering a pivot?
Make the change.
Iona?
Do it now. Do it scared. Do it however you're going to do it, because honestly, we're all going to die at some point. So please do the thing that you want to do, that lights you up, that you're here to do. If not now, when? So do it now.
I agree. Just face the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And do it in a way that works for you, and stop listening to the stories you're telling yourself. Well, that's another great episode, so thanks very much for listening.
If you or someone close to you needs to access mental health support, please contact your GP, or if it's out with normal office hours, get in touch with NHS 24 on 111. Alternatively, contact the Samaritans on 116 123. All calls are free of charge from any phone. You can also find more support information on the Tickety Boo website, ticketyboopodcast.co.uk.